All right, welcome back, everyone. So some big stories to go over tonight. We're going to talk about how the NSA is going to be releasing documents detailing, allegedly, how the FBI has been spying on Americans illegally. Now, they have about, let's say, 7 people I think they were spying on legally, and this big thing's going to be released, and, well, 16,000 who may have been spied on illegally. So some big updates on this we're going to go into. Also, folks, a few other stories. We're talking about this pathogens found in the masks, these face masks we've been having to wear. Well, guess what, folks? You've been wearing these face masks. The face masks themselves may have a risk of getting you sick. Now, there's been a study at one of the universities down in Florida, and they found 11 different dangerous pathogens on these masks. So I'll be explaining this, going into a few other stories. A lot going on, folks. Also, around the 45-minute mark, we'll jump and do some updates on the election, what's happening on the investigations, updates with Arizona, a few other places. A lot to go into, folks. That said, as always, if you have questions, please leave them in the chat. Around the 30-minute mark, we'll get to them. And, folks, good to see you all. Yeah, happy Father's Day. Yeah, happy Father's Day, everyone. Yeah, Gary, yes, thank you also. You said even Josh, and happy Father's Day, gentlemen. Thank you. Jay Tay, you said, hey, Josh, can we sue them for spying on us? That's going to be a big question. If you were spied on illegally by the FBI, maybe there's some kind of legal route you can take. This is, I think, going to be one of the big questions that has to be answered as things go forward. Hey, Sunshine Happy said, hey, Josh, how you doing as well, Sunshine? Kelly Souza, good seeing you here. Thank you. Dave Johnson, hello as well. Yeah, folks, always a pleasure. That said, again, if you have questions, leave them in the chat. We'll try to get to around the halfway point. That said, let's jump into the first story for the night, going into what's happening with this NSA release. Now, Epoch Times reports, NSA agrees to release records on FBI's improper spying on 16,000 Americans. It says here, the National Security Agency, or the NSA, has agreed to release records on the FBI's improper spying on thousands of Americans, and the secretive agency disclosed in a recent letter. The agreement may signal a rift between the NSA and the FBI, according to attorney Ty Clevenger. It's been a lot of talk about, say, disputes between the NSA side and the FBI side when it comes to intelligence agencies. NSA tends to be more military intelligence. FBI is more like, government, normal political establishment type intelligence. Now, Clevenger last year filed a Freedom of Information Act, a FOIA request, on behalf of the Transparency Project, which is a Texas nonprofit seeking information on the FBI's improper searches of intelligence databases for information on 16,000 Americans. These searches violated rules governing how to use the U.S. government foreign intelligence information trove. U.S. Attorney James Bausberg, an Obama nominee, who served 7 years in the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court and presided over it from January 2020 to May 2021, wrote in a 2019 memorandum an order that was declassified last year. Now, the FBI insisted that the queries for all these 16,000 people, they say, quote, were reasonably likely to return foreign intelligence information or evidence of a crime because redacted. The reason is redacted. It's classic FBI report type stuff. You hear that? It was justified, they say, to spy on 16,000 people because, quote, redacted. Let's go into a bit more, folks. All right. Now, Bausberg wrote this. That was his report. Now, the judge found the position unsupportable, however, apart from searches of just 7 people. And so while the FBI claims that it was justified to spy on 16,000 people, the judge says that only 7 of those people were justified cases of government espionage, spying on American citizens. Now, still, Bausberg believes the data collection, he allowed the data collection to continue, even after the judge ruled that only 7 of those were legal, technically, right? Or justified, I should say. Prompting Elizabeth Goyton, the co-director of the Liberty and National Security Program at the Brennan Center for Justice, to lament that the court's decision on the data collection program authorized by Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA. You might remember that word, FISA. When Trump was spied on illegally by maybe illegally, I should say, by the FBI, because we haven't seen this whole thing come out just yet, right? We haven't seen the whole thing come out just yet. But remember how in 2016, when the FBI allegedly used the Steele dossier, which was a document written by a former British intelligence agent who collected the information from two unverified Russian sources, meaning that it was literally Russian disinformation, which was used to frame the narrative that Russian disinformation was interfering in our election in 2016. And the FBI used that to go and spy on people like Carter Page and Trump and all these guys. That was a lot of it was done under Section 702. This is a very controversial program that they have within the intelligence agencies that does allow some degree of spying on American citizens. Now, they say that with this, it's even more inexplicable given that the opinion was issued shortly after the government reportedly submitted FISA applications riddled with errors and omissions in the Carter Page investigation. Now, folks, we're still waiting to see what happens with the whole Durham report on what happened with U.S. government spying on American citizens, including the sitting president of the United States previously, Donald Trump, when he was in office by the intelligence agencies. Now, we've seen a lot of information on that. The technical name of that program was Crossfire Hurricane. It was also known as Spygate. Others called it Obamagate. That whole program of espionage, we really haven't seen exactly what was involved with that. Using open source information, we've been able to map it out fairly well. Epoch Times has some great coverage on this. I'm sure many of you have seen it. Now, John Durham was supposed to be releasing a public report on that, which everyone was waiting for. We never saw it. Durham was, however, appointed special counsel, and now we're wondering what the heck he's doing. No updates on Durham yet. Trump has questioned whether he's a real person, and that's basically where that whole narrative is now. But regardless of all of this, this issue now that's happening between the FBI and NSA is actually very significant, because if the suspicions around this are true, this could mean there's some kind of rift taking place, some kind of maybe conflict of some kind taking place between the NSA and the FBI. And if the NSA chooses, as it does seem to be doing in this case at least, to release information on FBI spying, this could be an interesting scenario to watch, folks, especially if it reveals illegal activities being done by one of our major intelligence agencies. All right, that said, let's go into a bit of what's happening with these face masks. Now, I'm sure many of you have been wearing your face masks regularly, as you've been told by your governments, especially if you're on public transportation, one of the few areas you still have to wear it in most places. It turns out, though, folks, that those face masks may actually contain dangerous pathogens, especially if you're not washing your mask regularly or disposing of it regularly. And the reality is that last year, when the pandemic first broke out, there were face mask shortages, and many people were not able to destroy their face masks, to throw them away and get new ones, because there was a global shortage of face masks. Now, even after that took place, then you started getting counterfeit masks, and people who had masks they believed worked tended to want to keep them. Turns out that these masks may themselves contain dangerous pathogens that may be getting you sick. Let's go to what's happening with this. It says here, University of Florida lab finds dangerous pathogens on children's face masks. This means, folks, if you have your kids in school, and yes, in many schools in the U.S., kids are still required to wear face masks, sometimes all day long, those face masks are them breathing in these dangerous pathogens because the masks may be contaminated. Let's go to what's happening. It says here, a laboratory at the University of Florida that recently analyzed a small sample of face masks detected the presence of 11 dangerous pathogens that included bacteria that caused diphtheria, pneumonia, and meningitis. Now, Gainesville parents in Florida, concerned about the harm caused to their children wearing face masks all day at school in 90-degree weather, sent out six masks, 5 that were worn by children ages 6 to 11 for 5 to 8 hours at school, and 1 worn by an adult to be analyzed for contaminants at the University of Florida's Mass Spectrometry Research and Education Center. Of these 6 masks, this is a small sample size, keep in mind, right? 3 were surgical, 2 cotton, and a polygator. Masks that had not been worn and a t-shirt worn at school acted as the control samples. Now, in other words, they had these 6 masks that they checked out again, and to make sure it wasn't just the masks themselves, not the kids, of course, breathing into them one parent. They also had masks that had not been worn as kind of the balance to the sample, and also a t-shirt, right? Now, going into this, it says here, 5 of the masks were found to be contaminated with parasites, fungi, and bacteria. According to Rational Ground, only 1 mask was found to contain a virus that can cause a fatal systemic disease in cattle and deer. Other less harmful pathogens that can cause ulcers, acne, and strep throat were also detected. Now, none of the controls were contaminated with pathogens. In other words, these issues they found were only on the masks that had been previously worn, meaning it wasn't the masks themselves. It was kids having to wear these masks all day at school. Now, on this note, again, now, none of the controls were contaminated with pathogens, meaning none of the masks that had not been worn were contaminated, while, quote, samples from the front, top, and bottom of the t-shirt found proteins that are commonly found in skin and hair, along with some commonly found in soil, meaning the masks that were worn by the kids were the problem, where the problems were found, folks. It was those masks being worn by kids on their faces, breathing that stuff in, that was causing those problems. Now, Amanda Donahoe, a mother of 3 elementary school children, teamed up with other parents to send the masks to the lab because her sons broke out in rashes from prolonged mask wearing. She wanted to find out what was going on with that. Now, this is a small sample size. This was just 6 masks that they tested. Maybe someone will do, based on this, a larger sample size and find out just exactly how common this is, if this happens in other places. I do know that in Idaho, similar studies were done, and they did find, for example, things that can cause strep throat, things like that. And so you do have other studies similar to this. We'll have to see what comes out from this, folks, because if it turns out that the masks themselves can make you sick, if the masks themselves can cause issues, especially when, let's say, your immune system is fairly important when you're dealing with what they claim to be, at least, is a pandemic, well, this could be a big issue in and of itself, especially if the masks themselves, according to the box that many of them come in, do not actually protect against viruses. Very bizarre situation we're in, folks. Let's go to a bit what's happening. Now, as this is going on, we've been talking a lot about the Chinese Communist Party, and the CCP is actually getting ready to celebrate its 100th anniversary. Now, this is the 100th anniversary of the founding of the CCP, not of its takeover of China. But for the CCP, this is actually a very important date. And on top of this, it's also gearing up to have the Beijing Olympics again for some reason, because you might remember in 2008, we had the Beijing Olympics. We also had the Winter Games in Russia. I don't know what's up with the Olympic Council. But as this is happening, the CCP is actually launching several very authoritarian programs. And it's unclear whether these are specifically related to, let's say, the Olympics. Remember the bloody Olympics in 2008? The CCP was cracking down on people. Whether this is them gearing up for the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party, or whether it's something else. Now, I'll go over some of the context to this, because there's actually a few different elements at play. Let's talk about what's happening. Epoch Times reports, Chinese regime sets up global campaign to recruit influencers to counter Western narratives. Now, it says here, the Chinese Communist regime's overseas English mouthpiece, CGTN, China Global Television Network, just finished a 2-month-long worldwide recruitment campaign of global media talents and social media influencers to produce pro-Beijing propaganda that counters Western narratives. Keep an eye out for these folks, because they're not trying to hide it anymore. People are literally selling themselves out to the Chinese Communist Party openly, to counter Western narratives, meaning spread CCP disinformation. Now, the state-backed media, CGTN of the CCP, offers rich incentives to attract young participants and has been targeting Western university students, alerting international media and communities. Now, CGTN launched this program. It's called Media Challengers. And this campaign was launched in April to globally enlist reporters, presenters, DJs, podcasters, and social media influencers who report in English. Why would they want to have things in English, right? They want to influence English audiences, English-speaking audiences. Now, according to the official website, and they have an official website for it, the campaign, quote, aims to inspire young people from all over the world. And it was a goal of, quote, injecting new power into international communication under the environment of media convergence. Now, participants are required to upload a 3-minute video of any genre, whether they are a foodie, techie, makeup guru, sports fanatic, or something else entirely, meaning the CCP is intending to use food, technology, makeup, sports, anything else entirely as vehicles through which to carry its propaganda, to use these influencers to carry its propaganda. Now, the state-run media offers up to $10,000 to winners and free professional training to finalists. What do you think professional training is with the Chinese Communist Party if the people already have the tangible skills through which to create content, right? Oftentimes, professional training of that type, you could assume it's going to be training on the CCP's narratives and CCP's agendas and messages. Now, it also offers job opportunities to winners. Job opportunities as foreign agents, technically, of the Chinese Communist Party, who will be spreading the CCP's narratives, right? Technically, under technical terms, maybe these people should consider at least registering under FARA, the Foreign Agents Registration Act, if they're acting as agents, literally, under this Chinese Communist Party program. But it says, right, it also offers job opportunities to winners, either part-time or full-time, at CGTN's Beijing headquarters in 3 regional production centers in Washington, London, and Nairobi. In addition, the winners, quote, will be invited to participate in CGTN's coverage of the ancient Silk Road from 2021 to 2022. Now, we've discussed some of this previously. Remember recently we discussed how Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party, announced that they were going to be launching a global propaganda campaign. The CCP is focusing real heavy right now on global information. Now, this could suggest a lot of things. On one side, you could say, well, maybe you wouldn't think this, but maybe they think they're strong. I don't think so. Typically, folks, the way the CCP does things is when you're strong, you show weakness. When you're weak, you pretend you're strong, right? They do the opposite of these things. This is classical Chinese military strategy. If the CCP is acting strong on the surface, it probably means they're weak internally. This is the reality of it. And as this is happening, there's some very odd things happening inside China right now. Let's go into it. Now, this is another story. It says, China has become a prison. Beijing beefs up security ahead of centennial celebration. This is, again, the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party. It says here, Chinese authorities are ramping up security measures around the country, especially in the capital city of Beijing, ahead of the Chinese Communist Party's centennial celebration on July 1st, coming up very soon, folks. Let's go over this just a sec. The tea tonight, by the way, is good old-fashioned British-style black tea, honey, and lemon. It's very nice. Now, folks, it says here, one Chinese netizen said China has been turned into a prison as we speak. The 100th anniversary of the founding of the CCP will be a grand occasion, and Chinese leader Xi Jinping will deliver a speech. Authorities announced on March 23rd. Now, prior to their announcement for this, the CCP has implemented a series of strict controls in order to maintain social stability. That's the key word they're using, maintain social stability, which is the term used by the regime to justify its totalitarian rule of China. On March 20th, 18 departments, including the Ministry of Civil Affairs, the Central Propaganda Department, where we just talked about the propaganda push. Finally, the Central Propaganda Department's involved in this. And the Central Committee of Public and Legal Affairs jointly launched a 3.5-month special program to suppress illegal social organizations. Keep in mind with the CCP, they often use keywords like this: illegal social organizations. How would you define a social organization? It could be a religious group. It could be a movement. It could be you and some friends meeting for coffee once a week and talking about politics. The broadness of this can be quite wide, let's put it that way. There's actually been a few different reports talking about this. The CCP is actually starting to persecute even new religious groups. They're going after things like Pure Land Buddhism, which is one of the traditional branches of Buddhism. They're going after religions in China that were not normally persecuted. They're going after additional Qigong practices, which is kind of like Chinese Tai Chi. They're going after people practicing like physical exercises in parks. The CCP is very, very widely cracking down on its people during this time. And this says a lot about something, because it means the CCP fears its own people, right? It would not be afraid of its own people gathering. It would not be afraid of its own people discussing politics. It would not be afraid of its people discussing news and information online if it was not afraid of something. Now on this, it says state-run media Xinhua reported that over 500 illegal social organizations have been identified, and they have now been placed under investigation. And again, these could be very large organizations, including organized religions. One of the new groups that appears to be targeted is the Pure Land Buddhism sect, which is a traditional, again, they're like 11 sects of Buddhism. This is a traditional Buddhist sect, meaning the CCP is expanding its persecution even of the normal religions. They've even begun persecuting normal Catholics in China, the ones the CCP used to allow. It used to be the case that in China, right, you could practice Christianity, you could practice Catholicism, but you had to practice the CCP's altered version of it. If you believe in the 10 commandments in China, that is 9 commandments, because the first commandment is not allowed under the Chinese Communist Party because there can be no power higher than the Communist Party. If you want to actually practice the real religion, the one that's not been altered by the CCP, you're what's called a house Christian. And if you're a house Christian, you're part of this illegal social organization category that can be persecuted. Now, as we're discussing this, there's something very interesting taking place, folks. As we're discussing this, now, we talked about how the CCP has identified 500 organizations it's going to start investigating, meaning target for persecution. We talked about how the CCP is creating new systems to persecute the Chinese people, to the extent that Chinese netizens are saying the country has become a prison, quote unquote prison. We've seen how the CCP is launching a global propaganda campaign, meaning that they're interested in countering narratives because they might be afraid of something. As this is happening, guess what else is happening? Someone, a very high-ranking intelligence official, just defected, allegedly, from China to the United States. There have been some reports centered on the U.S. They're allegedly talking right now as we speak to top-level U.S. intelligence agencies, revealing who knows what. We'll have to see. But the CCP is denying it's happening while not providing evidence, such as having the person appear in front of a camera to claim otherwise. In other words, folks, there's a big shakeup happening at the very top levels of the Chinese Communist Party. And what happens now, when someone with top-level intelligence defects from a country like the Chinese Communist Party and goes to the West, well, they're going to start revealing what the Chinese Communist Party was doing, including possibly things within the internal conflicts within the top levels of the CCP, including possibly criminal wrongdoing, including possibly and very likely information about the CCP's human rights abuses, including other information that we can only imagine because we haven't seen it yet. This could be China's Snowden. This could be the equivalent of that. It could even be much higher than that, depending on what is revealed. And as this information is being revealed, anybody who might be incriminated on the information that may be released is going to have a very small window that will incentivize them to make a choice. Do they stay in China and possibly face repercussions of whatever may soon come? Or do they also try to escape the country while they still can and escape maybe persecution? Do they face maybe sanctions internationally if they've committed crimes? Or do they defect to the West and say, I also want out of this, here's the information I have, and here's what's going on? At the very least, folks, we can expect there to be very, very intense paranoia right now as we speak within the top levels of the CCP. And based on the way they're behaving in a way that is extremely paranoid, right? Trying to suppress narratives, cracking down on their own people severely, going after 500 different organizations that they're not quite naming yet. The CCP is behaving like it's terrified while it's showing a strong face to the world. Something big is happening in China, folks. Something very big is going on in China right now. All right, let's jump into some questions, and then we'll go into some more stories. Let's see here. Actually, first, folks, I want to tell you what we're doing at Epoch TV. I did mention a few times now, Crossroads is totally demonetized on YouTube. Hopefully, they'll change it one of these days. We'll have to see what happens with it. So far, we're not seeing signs that they're going to change it. It'd be wonderful if they did. But you might notice we don't have super chat. We don't have advertisements. This is because Facebook is completely demonetized. We demonetized the channel. You might also notice that our subscriptions seem to be totally frozen, right? That said, folks, we have created our own platform, a subscription-based platform that's helping us keep the show going. And that is epochtv.com/Crossroads. If you want to support Crossroads, folks, please go to that link. You can find it in the description and in the chat. That's epochtv.com/Crossroads. And that's I'll show you a quick trailer of what we're working on over there. Jump into it now.
Right now in our country, the Constitution is the biggest barrier to the left having control over everything it wants. It limits what government can do. It protects the rights that we are given by God. In order to tear down the Constitution, you got to tear down the people who wrote it. And you have to tear down the founders. And that's what the 1619 Project is about. The First Amendment, we have 5 freedoms in it. Congress can't block any of that. So what they've done instead is Section 230 liability waivers. You have people in Congress explicitly urging these big tech monopolists who control the entire online market for speech. Facebook, I believe, was putting together vaccination scores on people. And if you were vaccine skeptical, they would downplay, deplatform things that you said that were related to it to make sure other people didn't see it. And if you can do it on that, you can do it on anything. You can do it on any topic. You can do it to any person for any reason. And that's really scary.
All right, folks. Again, that's epochtv.com/Crossroads. If you want to support our channel, please go to that link. It helps us keep the show going. We also have some great other programs there you might like, and also a lot of exclusive content. Again, the interviews, some good stuff in the works. Hint, hint, you'll see soon. Great stuff there, folks. And again, I appreciate your support. Now, that said, let's go into some questions for the night. Real quick, MG, you're asking, what about Maricopa? You're referring to Maricopa County in Arizona. And Maricopa County right now is having an election audit. I'm going to go into what's happening with the elections later in this program over on Epoch TV around the 45-minute mark. So if you're there, stay there. If not, we'll jump over there in about 15 minutes. To make it brief, though, they've extended the deadline. Well, they're wrapping up right now the investigations. They're wrapping up the audit. They should have it done actually very soon. Once that's done, it might be 6 to 8 weeks before we see the public report. And as that's happening, a lot of different states, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Nevada, many states now are talking about holding their own audits modeled after what Arizona is now doing. A lot of updates on it. Again, we'll go over this more on Epoch TV. Pipe Rhymes, you're asking, what is CCP? CCP is the acronym for Chinese Communist Party, the ruling party of China right now. This is from the one and only Pinky. Good seeing you. You said, Happy Father's Day, Josh. I appreciate it. You said, and Happy Father's Day as well to all the fathers out there. You said, what do you think about Dong Jiwei defecting? This is the individual I was mentioning just a bit ago. He said, so do you think he is behind the reversal of the propaganda about the CCP virus, about Wuhan, about Fauci, about hydroxychloroquine? Okay, I should be clear. We don't yet know for sure whether Dong Jiwei has in fact defected. All the evidence does appear to be pointing that way. There's been a lot of public reporting on it saying that Dong Jiwei has defected. Again, this is a top-level intelligence official in China. To have someone this high level defect is a big deal. right? Imagine if like John Brennan, like, going back, imagine if like John Brennan, head of the CIA, like defected to China. Imagine if like James Comey defected to China. This is kind of what that's like just to put it in perspective, right? This is like, imagine one of the top intelligence officials that you see on TV in your country suddenly going to a foreign hostile country. And, basically where it's at right now is the CCP is denying that it happened. But normally if they deny it happened, they have the person appear on TV. They have the person give a public statement. They might have them show a newspaper so it's real and it's the day. They're not doing that, meaning that the CCP is not providing the evidence it normally would provide to say that this is just a rumor. And it does appear there's some other stuff going on. I've actually heard a lot of other rumors, which I won't repeat because they're still just really in the rumor phase. But there's a lot of different information coming out right now suggesting that there's some very big shakeups, let's say, happening at the top levels of the Chinese Communist Party, Deng Jiwei being the kind of central point right now. Now, you're asking, do I think that he's behind the reversal of the propaganda about the CCP virus, about Wuhan, about Fauci, about hydroxychloroquine? We don't know. I believe it's the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, that is currently debriefing Deng Jiwei. In other words, this guy defected to the United States, and he's being debriefed by the top intelligence agencies in the United States. We're probably not going to hear anything public from him until whatever he's doing with the U.S. government is completed. I would love to interview him. I don't know if it's going to be possible, but not until this individual basically goes through the whole government debriefing process, whatever they want to do afterwards. Maybe they'll put him in protective custody. They do stuff like that sometimes, protective programs. Maybe they'll do a media tour and have him give public statements. We'll have to see, depending on the severity of the information that's released. Now, any speculation on what information is being provided is pure speculation at this point. So anything I were to say about whether he's revealing stuff about propaganda, reversal, about Fauci, about Wuhan lab theory, about hydroxychloroquine, at this point, any of that would just be speculation. So we'll have to see. What we can say, though, is that this may be a thread unraveling something much larger. The CCP is behaving in an extremely paranoid manner right now. The Chinese Communist Party is behaving like it is terrified right now, not just externally, but also internally, the way it's going after its own people. We can expect even infighting within the CCP to increase. We can expect other people consider, at the very least, defecting as well. We can expect people within the Chinese Communist Party to start to become less trustful of each other. This is, again, a thread that has been pulled out from the body of the CCP, and we'll have to see what happens from here. Next question is from Kush Sin. You said, if U.S. government already knows where the virus originated from, why are they taking 90 days to submit the report? Yeah, good question. Yeah, well, let's put it this way. Early intelligence assessments, including from the State Department, even before this whole thing started, even when it was called rumors and propaganda or conspiracy theories, whatever the heck name they wanted to call it, even back then, folks, the State Department and other intelligence agencies were suggesting that the lab origin theory was probable. Even organizations like, for example, the Science magazine, right? Nature magazine, I'm sorry, really respected science journals were pointing to Wuhan, China, when they were talking about the origin of the virus. What happened? The CCP came out and tried to make that a racial statement. They said, oh, how dare you call it the China virus? How dare you call it the Wuhan virus? How dare you suggest it came from China? And then you had propagandists, and that's what they are in the United States, pushing this line, saying, oh, look, this narrative is causing hate against Asian Americans on American streets. I have plenty of Asian friends, folks. Most of them are also very unhappy about the virus leaking from China. In fact, Epoch Times also is like one of the only free media of Chinese communities outside of China, right? I can tell you the whole thing was a bunch of propaganda nonsense. But this was the narrative being pushed, and that narrative pressured a lot of organizations and influential individuals to not talk about the origin of the virus. The CCP used that method to suppress legitimate information, including scientific information about the virus and where it came from. In fact, even have journalists coming out now and admitting that the reason they did not acknowledge it, that maybe the virus that allegedly came from the Huanan seafood market after all the information was debunked, suggesting it might have come there. After we've gone more than a year now, and we still don't know the animal reservoir of the virus, which would be seriously the very first thing you would ever need to know if you actually wanted to stop a pandemic like this. We still don't even know that. And they don't want to acknowledge it. Hey, maybe the virus leaked from that lab a few miles down the street from where they say ground zero was, where they had viruses that identically almost fit the description of the virus we're now facing. This is where the narrative is at, right? There was a cover-up. The government was involved in the cover-up. Media were involved in the cover-up. The CCP pushed the narrative to cover it up, claiming it was a race issue. And now people are having to, let's say, have their comeuppance and face the truth and admit to some extent that maybe they got the story wrong. This is where things are at with it, folks. Now, why is the intelligence agency, why are they taking 90 days to tell us where the virus came from if they actually care about this? Your guess is as good as mine. Maybe they think that it'll have less international impact in 90 days. Maybe they think some of the, let's say, pressure that is built up right now will have blown over within 90 days. Maybe they want to have a process of assessment internally. There's a lot of possibilities for it. This is from Anthony J. Buss. He said, hello, Joshua. I'm a Catholic priest and always enjoy your input. Thank you. He said, really puts things in perspective. I'm on your page. God bless you and great good. God works through you for the benefit of us all. Be assured of my prayers. I really appreciate it. Thank you. This is from Sparks and Clark. He said, I am Catholic too, Father. You guys talking in the chat. He said, thank you for all you do to serve our church. Most Catholics here in Virginia are subscribed to Epoch Times as well. Thank you, Epoch Times. Thank you as well. Actually, folks, I don't know if you saw yet, but we also launched a magazine. Epoch Times has now launched a lifestyle magazine. Maybe we'll get some promo stuff for that soon. We're really trying to expand, really trying to get into new areas. We're especially looking at culture and kind of the, let's say, trying to restore some traditional values, right? Giving these things a spotlight. Once again, because I don't think many magazines even have this stuff anymore. We have a lot of good stuff in the works, folks. So if you like what we're doing currently, just wait, because there's a whole lot more on the horizon. This is from CK. He said, Josh, what are your thoughts on the NBC exclusive interview with Putin? I have a lot of ideas about what's happening with Putin. Now, keep in mind, going back to when Trump was still president, and Trump was being framed as a Putin puppet and all these other narratives, and you had Robert Mueller, the special counsel, investigating Trump, and everyone was posting on Twitter, hashtag it's Mueller time. And you had them spreading this information about the PP dossier and things like this. And there were all kinds of wild rumors spreading around. And then the entire house of cards fell down. They pretended it never happened. Remember that? During that whole time, Trump was actually interested in, making some deals with Russia and talking with Russia, because he was saying, wouldn't it be nice to have them as a friend rather than an adversary? Really, the potential of Trump making peace with Russia was there. Trump was interested in doing so. It was really the, let's say, investigations, the Mueller investigations and so on, that was preventing that from happening. Now, going back a few years prior to Trump, when Obama was president, they had the Russian reset. Remember that? The New START treaty, when they wanted to restart negotiations with Russia. They were working on it, folks. That fell apart when Russia invaded Ukraine and kind of started doing its own thing. It does seem to be the case now that Russia's come back to the negotiating table. In my assessment, now let's go back in time to the Cold War, when the Soviet Union and the Chinese Communist Party were having pretty serious conflicts. Now, the Chinese Communist Party was little brother to the Soviet Union. The Chinese Communist Party did not like being called little brother of the Soviet Union. They wanted to become the ones in charge of the global propaganda, the global communist revolution. And that tension between Russia and China at that time escalated into things like the Amur Valley conflict, into things like disagreements over Vietnam. Vietnam during the Vietnam War went back and forth between being aligned with the Soviet Union and being aligned with China, to the extent that after the war ended, China actually invaded Vietnam. They didn't like them. There was a lot of fighting between the Chinese Communist Party and the Soviet Union, even though they were ideologically aligned. Now, during that time, Richard Nixon, for better or for worse, I'd say maybe for worse at this point, made a deal with China. And part of the assessment was they could, if a war were to break out during the Cold War, they believed the United States could take on Russia or take on China, but not both, right? That if a war scenario were to happen, they couldn't take on both of them. And so they went there and they divided them. They got the Chinese Communist Party to side with the United States. Now, there's a lot of assessments on this. The CCP did use the United States. The CCP didn't change in nature. The CCP used that as a window to manipulate global institutions like the United Nations, like the World Health Organization, as we see now much later, like the World Bank, right? The CCP used that to make the whole world a whole lot less free, basically. But it seems to be the case now that as the CCP is becoming more hostile, and again, you have this Russia-China alliance to an extent, frenemies, they're not quite friends, but they're not quite enemies, right? They don't really get along with each other, but they have to because it's kind of the global economic system once you're sanctioned by the United States, right? You have different countries now going to Russia and trying to make some kind of amends. This is as Russia is positioning itself to possibly invade Ukraine once again, talking about additional wars and things like this. The CCP is also becoming significantly more aggressive. And it does seem to be the case that suddenly there's interest in Russia once again. Suddenly there's interest, both of the US government and among the mainstream media, to have this narrative of kind of fixing ties with Russia. Now, we'll have to see what happens with it, right? We'll have to really see what happens with it. And the way I'm viewing this is basically the same thing Nixon did, just reversed. Rather than working with China to distance the Soviet Union, to weaken the Soviet Union, it looks, at least, like they're trying to align with Russia to weaken the Chinese Communist Party. And frankly, I think Russia would be happy to do that. I think Russia, if it meant getting rid of sanctions and not having to work with the CCP, and keep in mind that a lot of the CCP's unconventional warfare and subversion programs are based on Soviet-era programs, many of which were carried out by people currently in power in Russia. Remember, Vladimir Putin was I think he was a KGB assigned with the Stasi in East Germany or something like that. Right? He was a top-level intelligence agent in Russia. He knows these games. He knows what the CCP is doing. He sees right through it. And if he has an option to, let's say, prevent the CCP from carrying out what the Soviets very likely knew that they were trying to carry out because they mirrored the same programs, I think they'd take it. It does seem to be the case that the trajectory, the discussions, the debates, and the deals that are being made look a lot like this is what is happening right now. Now, we'll have to see what happens with this again, but this does, in the way I'm viewing it at least, my analysis, take it for what it's worth, right? It looks like this is what's happening. Right? It looks like a reverse of what Nixon did, but rather than side with the CCP to distance Russia, he's siding with Russia to distance the CCP, right? This is at least how I'm viewing it. Let's see here, another question. This is from MM. Let's see. He said, quick question. Whenever you move over to Epoch TV to discuss elections, the video ends, so we don't get to see the rest of the video. Yeah, I apologize, folks. I mean, believe me, if we could keep this show purely on YouTube, if we could have, if we could keep it purely on YouTube, I'd love to. We don't plan on ending things on YouTube. We plan on keeping the program here. But the fact is, we've been totally demonetized on YouTube. If we were to only stay on YouTube, we could not continue doing the show because we couldn't make a living. It's just the reality. They've censored this show. They've totally demonetized it. Our subscriptions are totally frozen. Our growth is completely stopped. We were growing by leaps and bounds for a while. It seems that, I don't know what happened. Maybe YouTube did something. But it is the case right now that if we were to only stay on YouTube, we couldn't keep the show going. And so I do apologize. I don't like doing part of the program over on Epoch TV, but if we were to do otherwise, we couldn't keep the show going. And so, I do appreciate your support, folks, and I would love to do it for free, believe me. But again, this is not only, I think, how we're staying alive, frankly, but also how I think we're creating kind of the future, I would hope, of video news. Having Epoch TV as a platform gives us a lot of options. It lets us produce really good content. As it takes on more subscriptions, it means that we have a lot more, let's say, foundational bandwidth that they cannot get rid of. They cannot censor it, meaning it's very stable, meaning that we, again, a lot of our financial model is like subscription based. It's something they can't censor because they'd have to cancel every single one of you to do so. It's only because we have that we can do a lot of what we do. Because if they can censor us, they can go after advertisers, and it doesn't stop us, right? This is one of the big strengths that we have as a media. And so, again, when it comes to Epoch TV, we do hope this is the future of journalism. And I don't plan to stop doing the lives here. I do enjoy doing them, but please do be patient that we do part of the show over on Epoch TV. But you say our own system is still developing once our live is ending. We need to download from the live from our backend and upload it again. So the whole process takes half a day long. I apologize. You said you're trying to build something like YouTube and your tech team works very hard, but we don't like big tech. It has so much money to build over the server. So we will sort it out in a month. Yeah, a lot going on, folks. Basically right now we're working on a lot of things on the back end with Epoch TV. It's pretty solid right now. We do have some issues here and there, and so I do hope you folks can be patient with us while we try to build it. We're trying to build new servers. We're trying to get the thing working rock solid. It's almost there. Please be patient with us in the meantime, but really, folks, we're trying to create the whole future of journalism here, and we have a lot of very lofty goals with it. And so you're witnessing now the beginning of something, and it's good to have you all here for it. All right, folks, that said, we're going to jump over to Epoch TV now to talk about what's happening with the election investigations. A few updates of what's happening in Arizona, a few updates of what's happening in Georgia, a few updates on other states now talking about doing their own, including Nevada, including Pennsylvania again. Now, folks, that said, if you have, again, Epoch TV, please stay there. If you're watching it there, please stay there. If you don't, please check out the link in the description or in the chat. That's epochtv.com/crossroads. And folks, for those of you who aren't able to get Epoch TV, again, I still really appreciate you all. Really enjoy doing these lives, folks. Wonderful having you here. And as always, folks, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you. Stay informed and stay free.
Let us tell your story.
Facts always matter.
Hearing from everyone, from newsmakers to people just like you.
Deep dive interviews that challenge assumptions.
Bringing fast, compelling, first-hand news from China.
All right, folks, thanks for being here. Let's go now into what's happening with the election audits. A few updates with this. Now, of course, all eyes are on Maricopa County right now. Let's start with what's happening there. Epoch Times reports Maricopa County audit report is expected now in August, meaning it's going to be a few weeks before we see it. Now, the final report for the 2020 election audit taking place in Arizona's largest county, and the one most, let's say, where most suspicions of election fraud took place, right, is not expected to be out until August. An official involved with the work says, now led by Cyber Ninjas, which was hired by the Arizona Senate, auditors are working on evaluating ballots after finishing their ballot recount, save less than 100 ballots. In other words, all but pretty much 100 ballots now have been reviewed. That's a lot of them. The ballot evaluation is supposed to wrap up by the end of June, by the end of this month, meaning they're going to finish up the investigation this month. By the end of this month, it's done. And folks, again, this is soon, right? We're already on the 20th here. The 26th, I believe, is the date they said it would wrap up. That's also the date that Trump, interestingly, is going to be holding his first rally, coming back on the public stage. And we're not going to see the actual findings from that investigation until August now, meaning July we'll have to see. Now, the Senate is slated to vacate the Veterans Memorial Coliseum where the audit is taking place by July 1st, meaning they have to be out of there by July 1st. But there will be a few weeks worth of additional work after that, according to a Ken Bennett, a former Arizona Republican Secretary of State, telling this to Epoch Times, meaning they're finishing the audit taking place at the Veterans Memorial Coliseum where the investigation is taking place. But they're saying there's a few weeks worth of additional work they're going to be doing. Now, we'll have to see what that additional work is. We'll have to see what comes out from this. But based on this investigation, and they've been expanding it and talking about expanding it even more, we can expect to see the findings of this in August, folks. And get ready for the fireworks, because no matter which way it goes, whether it's a lot of fraud, a little fraud, or no fraud, people across the aisle are going to be, things may be a bit wild, let's put it that way. It'll be interesting to see that Trump is coming back on the scene, because depending on also how he directs his supporters, this is going to say a lot about what's happening in this country, and whether it means Trump trying to get, have the election overturned, whether it means trying to get additional audits and using that to get the election overturned, whether it means using the audits and the investigations and the evidence to, say, push for election reform and push for new candidates and use this in the narrative battle the country is now in. There's a lot of possibilities with this. No matter what comes out from it, it's going to be big. Now, on this note, a few other things happening. In Pennsylvania, it says an election audit is now a very real possibility. And so, folks, if you're in Pennsylvania, your state may soon have its own election audit. Now, on this, Epoch Times reports, a Pennsylvania Senate Republican suggested that an election audit in the Commonwealth is a very real possibility after meeting with a group of audit activists at the Capitol. And he said, there are a lot of things under consideration right now, and I told them to check back in a week or two, and we hope to have some more details. Now, it's according to Senate State Government Committee Chairman Dave Argel, a Republican, according to a recent interview he gave with a local news outlet, meaning Pennsylvania, as is the case in many other states currently watching what's happening in Arizona, appears to be waiting until maybe the audit finishes at the very least in Arizona, or waiting until the Arizona report comes out in August before they move forward with maybe doing their own audits. All eyes right now are on Arizona. All eyes right now on how they're doing their audit. All eyes right now are on the information coming out from the audit once it is completed, especially, folks, if they find fraud. Especially if the practices that they find to have caused fraud were practiced in other states, at the very least, because their own voters, especially the Trump voters, are going to be very unhappy if the audits, for example, do uncover fraud. We'll have to see what happens with it. This is where things are at with this. Now, in addition to that, Nevada, is also looking at holding its own audit. Now, Epoch Times reports, Arizona-style election audit needed in Nevada, according to a GOP chairman. Now, after visiting the election audit in Arizona's Maricopa County, the head of Nevada's Republican Party said a similar review is needed in Nevada, although that possibility appears slim, as Democrats control both houses of the state legislature. And he said, hats off to the leadership here in Arizona. I think that sets the model, that sets the tone for Nevada. That's Republican Chairman Michael McDonald saying this in an interview posted on Twitter, referring to the audit efforts in Maricopa County. He says, we want to duplicate that in Nevada. Now, the interesting thing with this, again, is that depending on the information that comes out from Arizona, Republican or Democrat, there's going to be a whole lot of demand for an audit taking place in other states if any type of fraud is found. If any degree of fraud is found, this means that the Republican voting base in these other states are going to want to have their own audits. Republican or Democrats in power, it does not matter. People are going to want answers, folks. Now, whether the local politicians respond to them, whether the local politicians act on that, and especially if lawsuits are brought forth by the Trump team based on, again, whatever comes out from this and based on whether these same practices happen in other states, this is going to be pretty much the next, year probably where things are at when it comes to legal cases, when it comes to maybe protests, when it comes to debates. Things are about to get very tense, folks. So put your seatbelts on, so to speak, because this is where things are going right now. Now, on the note of other states looking into possible fraud that took place, Arizona being the main focus, big things are happening now in Georgia. Now, Georgia has also been discussing having its own audit. Georgia right now is also looking at information within the state, and Georgia right now has outlined 100,000 names to be cut from their voter rolls. Epoch Times reports Georgia's Secretary of State this week announced he is set to remove some 100,000 names from voter rolls, enough maybe to overturn an election. Now, the first major voting list maintenance following the 2020 election. The names are being removed because of a national change of address form submitted to the U.S. Postal Service. Now, election mail being sent to them bouncing back or having no contact with election officials for at least 5 years. Now, on this is according to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, a Republican, saying in a statement. He said, making sure Georgia's voter rolls are up to date is key to ensuring the integrity of our elections. And he said, that is why I fought and beat Stacey Abrams in court in 2019 to remove nearly 300,000 obsolete voter files before the November election, and will do so again this year. Bottom line, there is no legitimate reason to keep ineligible voters on the rolls. Now, the case in question saw Abrams, a failed gubernatorial candidate, take Raffensperger to court through her group Fair Fight Action. A judge ruled against the plaintiffs, but Raffensperger's office eventually reinstated 22,000 names because it said it was interpreting a state law differently. Now, whether states clean up voting rolls has been a big debate. The reason being, one of the main programs that was launched across many parts of the U.S. during the 2020 elections was universal mail-in voting. And the way they did that in many states was they used the voter rolls and they sent out ballots to every single person on the voter rolls. They're trying to make this a federal law right now. The chance of them passing it is very slim, but they're trying it. Now, on this note, the problem you have with that is that if they don't clean their voter rolls, if they don't clean the voter rolls, if they don't get rid of names, for example, that maybe people have died, maybe people have moved out of state, maybe other issues have taken place, maybe the person's a felon, right? If they don't clean their voting rolls, they don't get rid of those, meaning that people get ballots that are not theirs. In fact, during the elections in 2020, I got 3 ballots that were not mine in the mail. It was very common because they did not clean their voting rolls. And if you're an ideological, motivated person who maybe feels extremely passionate about elections and so on, the temptation to fill out those is very high for some people. Now, think yourselves, folks. How many friends or family members do you have who you think might be so, let's say, hate Trump enough, for example, to maybe fill out the extra ballot that shows up at their doorstep, right? How many of you know a person who might do that? That's the concern, right? And this is, again, a push across the country to do similar things, to clean up voting rolls. We'll have to see which other states do it. Now, on this note, also on Georgia, some other big things are happening there. Now, get this. Now, they're talking about also making an audit in Georgia, and there's some big updates now on what's happening there when it comes to them, say, finding issues. Epoch Times reports Georgia's investigators notes detail massive issues during 2020 elections. This is, again, notes, folks, and they're suggesting there were massive issues that took place when they were counting the votes, that took place when people were casting their votes. Now, it says here, newly published notes jotted down by an election monitor details a slew of issues witnessed in Georgia's largest county during the 2020 election. Carter Jones was tapped by Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to observe firsthand the election in Fulton County, another one of the big names you might have heard in the 2020 elections. His notes detail what he saw from November 2nd to November 7, 2020. Problems started from the time Jones arrived at the English Street warehouse, which holds various election materials. At approximately 9 p.m. after Raffensperger's office received reports throughout the afternoon of materials not being delivered to polling places in a timely manner or at all. Just 4 minutes after arriving, Jones saw an election official working to reset poll pads for a precinct. The precinct only received 1 bag of pads despite the system at the warehouse showing both had been checked out. Jones said many bags of pads and other materials were not packed and paperwork was not matching up. He used the word chaos and said there was much confusion. One county official blamed the Secretary of State's office, claiming they received a flawed file. But officials with the office responded that the alleged issue was easy to disprove. Now, issues continued cropping up on Election Day. Now, at State Farm Arena, Jones said there were too many ballots coming in for secure black ballot boxes. So many workers were moving them in rolling bins, 2,000 at a time. He said this seems like a massive chain of custody problem. Remember, folks, chain of custody is one of the big narratives coming up. Chain of custody, being able to track whether ballots are legitimate or not. And some of the activities that took place in Georgia created, as Jones described, a massive chain of custody problem. He said, it is my understanding that the ballots are supposed to be moved in numbered, sealed boxes to protect them, and they were not. Later in the night, the Monitor became aware of reports that Fulton County officials said they were stopping counting for the night. Remember that? Prompting observers to leave. Remember that, folks? Remember when they stopped counting the votes in Fulton County and the observers left? It says here, right, prompted the observers to leave, only to resume with no one monitoring them. Jones did not arrive until an hour after workers resumed counting. At approximately 12:08 a.m. on November 5th, Jones reported that order is starting to break down. He said Ralph Jones, a Fulton County election official, newly rescanned some ballots. Why would they do that, right? Newly rescanned some ballots that had already been processed by Shays Moss, an election worker, Jones added. Inspector James Calloway arrives to investigate the accusations that the Fulton staff had told the press to go home and were scanning without observers. He reported shortly afterward. Now, staff initially sealed the ballot bins about 30 minutes later after leaving them unsealed for an undetermined period of time, something that again creates these chain of custody problems. Jones left and went to sleep after swinging back by the warehouse. Now, as workers tried to scan adjudicated ballots in the afternoon of November 5th, get this, all 5 scanners went down, and Dominion Voting Systems Technology employees began uploading to flash drives. It says best practices say not to take down all scanners at once, and a backlog started building. According to the Monitor's notes, Fulton County adjudicated some 106,000 ballots. And the way a lot of these voting machines work, typically, is that if there's an error in the counting, they have to be physically adjudicated. A physical poll worker needs to basically go back and check the votes and say who the person voted for. Adjudicated. 106,000, folks. Now, that process applies to ballots that the tabulating machines could not read. People then pore over the paper to see if they can ascertain who the voter wanted to vote for, meaning it's up to the poll worker in a lot of cases, right? At 7:07 p.m., workers started hearing they'd scanned just 10,000 ballots in 5 hours. And he said people are realizing that they are in at least another 8 to 10 hours of work to finish up. So the staff redouble their efforts. Now, when this happens, what else happens? A fresh wave of workers arrive about 30 minutes later. Jones heard one worker ask a colleague whether they were ready for a long night, and the second replied, yes, I'm ready to expletive up. You can imagine what they said. Expletive up, right? He said, I must keep an eye on these two. Perhaps this was a bad joke, but it was very poorly timed in the presence of the poll watcher. Now, Jones wrote wondering about the vetting practices of a company called Happy Faces, which hires these temporary workers. He also said that there seemed to be lots of training on the fly happening with the workers who had recently arrived. And as the girlfriend of elections director Rick Barron visited him, despite lacking credentials to be in the room. In other words, folks, the issues, the chaos, the lack of chain of custody, the adjudicating about over 106,000 ballots that took place here, all of this is in context of them discussing whether they need to have an audit. Now, love to see what comes out from this, folks. Many states are now talking about replicating the investigation that is now, as we speak, taking place in Arizona, and is ready to wrap up. Now, as this happens again, and as more information arises on what happened in other states, this chaos, these lies, this recounting of let's say, votes by very tired and maybe very politically motivated individuals who pretty much the integrity of the elections is on their shoulders. All of this is being weighed on whether, again, audits are needed. And we'll have to see what comes out from this, folks. This is where things are at. A lot coming out. I mean, every day we're getting updates on this. And again, I'll keep you all updated as we get more information. A lot of stuff going on. All right, folks, that said, again, I do these lives every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday, 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So I'll see you folks again this coming Tuesday, 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Said, folks, always appreciate you all. If you want to go the extra mile, you want to help Crossroads, you can please tell a friend or family member about the show. It does really help us. That said, folks, as always, please take care of yourselves. Happy Father's Day. Stay informed and stay free. Thank you.